Welcome to the Bleadership podcast by the real Dwight Thomas, where Black culture and Black professionalism meet. I'm really excited for you all to be a part of our first ever episode that we're recording for the podcast. This is a podcast that was specifically designed for us, by us, to celebrate Black people and Black culture. If you're watching this from YouTube, go ahead and click that subscribe button in the bio. And if you're watching this from Spotify, please be sure to tell a friend to tell a friend. Also, all of my social media can be found in the link tree in the bio, so lock in. Now, I want to jump into our first ever episode. I'm really excited to introduce you all to somebody. He is a stranger to you all, but no stranger to me. He is my line brother, Mike Hamilton. Shout out to Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, the best fraternity to ever do it. That's no shade. It's just the truth. We don't make the rules. It's just the truth. We were just here first. So real quick, I want to tell you a little bit about my line brother before we get into what we're actually going to discuss on the show. So Mike Hamilton has most recently served as the Senior Vice President of Commerce at Def Jam Records, where he led the department and oversaw the label's relationship with streaming services like Spotify, Apple, and Tidal. Prior to Def Jam, he did stints at Epic Records and Atlantic Records. Over a decade of service in the music industry, he has worked with some of the most well-known artists, some of which are Money Long, Coco Jones, Giveon, Yo Gotti, Rick Ross, Cardi B, shout out to New York in the building, Nipsey Hussle, R.I.P. to a legend, Meek Mill, Lil Uzi Vert, Janelle Monáe, Gucci Mane, Future, Jennifer Hudson, 21 Savage, K. Michelle, Tank, and Travis Scott. And that's just a few. That's just a few. The list continues. He began his career in 2014 as an assistant at Atlantic Records. My line brother was named a Hits Daily Double Noisemaker in 2021. The following year, he was named to Billboard's 2021 R&B and Hip Hop Power Players list while working at Epic Records. He is a graduate of Howard University, the real HU, and he serves as on the board of governors for the Recording Academy's New York chapter. Everybody, please welcome my well-decorated, amazing, talented, credited line brother to the first episode of the Bleadership podcast.
Wow, I'm honored. I didn't realize I was the first guest.
You are the first guest. You're going to talk to that mic, but you're the first guest.
Wow. And yeah, I'm currently at Gamma, which is, a new music and media and technology company. I've never heard my bio read like that before. But yeah, I've been in the new position for a few months now. All of the great things I've done. Yeah, led me here. So excited to sit here and that's all the great topics we have.
I love how humble you are. Humility is key. And I read the bio like that because it's like that. You know what I'm saying? It's like that. So we're not going to downplay nothing you've ever done. You've put in your work in the music industry and as a human at large. Also, as a life member of the fraternity, he's put in years of service. So we're not going to downplay that because that ain't no joke. So I'm really excited to have you here. I feel like I'm sitting amongst a celebrity. And
that would be you.
Tell Cardi B, me and her could be best friends. But yeah, I'm really excited to have you here. We have a bunch of cool topics in store. So I quickly want to give an overview of what the show is going to be like to both you and the guests so that they know what to expect throughout the episode. So on each episode, we will have a guest. You are the first one because we do everything first. You'll be the first one to ever be a guest on the show. The first half of the show, we're going to talk about topics that are going on in Black culture, right? So topics that are relevant to us as Black people and what we experience. And then we'll take some questions from the audience. So I have some questions that were submitted by some of the people who are supporting the podcast, and we're excited to get this off the ground. We'll answer some questions and give some advice on general things. After that, we're going to talk about your leadership journey. So we're going to ask you to talk to us about your journey as a Black professional in the game. And we'll have a few questions for you there. And then we do have a question from an audience member who asked for some advice about being a Black professional. We're going to jump into that and do some talking about that. And then we'll close out with letting people know where they can find you and thanking everybody for joining us. Okay. Sound good?
Yep.
Sound good. So let's jump into it. The first thing that I want to talk about, the exciting inauguration is happening. The inauguration is happening next week, Monday, the 20th, on MLK Day. I know as Black people, we're also excited about what's to come. And we are anticipating some extreme loss for us as a people. But one of the things that Trump and his admin have been talking about a lot is that they are looking forward to cutting some of the funding and DEI programs, so federal funding for DEI programs and DEI programs at large, and believing that it doesn't create a fair and equal atmosphere for all people because it prioritizes certain groups of people. And so there's some companies that have already said that they are cutting their DEI initiatives, such as Ford, Walmart, McDonald's, Toyota, Harley Davidson. But one that feels the most relevant and most notable for this conversation is Meta, Facebook, Instagram. They're committed to cutting their DEI programs because they've said they want to align with what the incoming administration is trying to do. So I have a million thoughts on it. I can go for days, but I want to hear from you. Who do you think this is going to impact the most? Who do you think is going to be the most hurt by these DEI initiatives being removed?
I mean, well, us, obviously, right? I think that the idea that DEI is ruining all these things is obviously, a far right, talking point that we can't subscribe to. I think the whole point of DEI is, and it's been weaponized as like this negative word now, or this negative acronym now. It's really just saying, listen, there are more people who are qualified than this one group of people. It is not saying that people from underrepresented backgrounds should get preferential treatment. What it is doing is acknowledging, listen, there are institutionalized biases in all of these processes and all of these companies and all of these different industries. Let's make sure that we are not overlooking people who are also qualified, who just happen to have different racial, socioeconomic, religious backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. That's really all DEI is. It's under attack because, they're claiming it's reverse racism and all of these things that we know aren't true. It isn't saying that, and the way they've twisted it is to make people believe, you got to give, Black people or Latino people or women or, you have to give them opportunity because of their background. No, you still have to be qualified.
Amen.
So it's not about just giving people, just meeting some quota for these different, diversity initiatives and backgrounds. It's more so saying, listen, we might have some blind spots. Let's make sure we're not missing anyone who would also be qualified, who historically would not be considered. So that's really what it means. I'm hoping that there will be companies that decide to stand up to these new mandates and get creative with how they push back against it, or really not actually push back, but say, hey, listen, we're just still going to stand up for what we believe is right. We believe that the workforce, is more successful when it's equitable. And, any research has shown that the more diverse your workforce is and how diverse your company is, the more successful you are and where you drive revenue. So if it's really about money, then you really should, be speaking about diversity in those terms. But, people don't care about money only when it's coming from certain people.
People don't care about money till we hold that black dollar back because that's when it hurts. But really quickly, you talked about how people have in some ways painted this as reverse racism and talked about it being prioritizing marginalized groups. And it makes me think a lot about how people say things like, oh, someone is just a DEI hire, right? Like we've watched so many Black people step into their greatness and have been discredited because people have weaponized DEI, right? And what DEI means. And what's so sad about that is, I don't know about you, but I personally don't know nobody Black that was given a job without being overqualified.
Absolutely.
In fact, if I'm being honest, I believe that black people have to come to the table more qualified in order to get the job
As the
than their
saying goes, we have
counterparts.
to work twice as hard to get half as far. So yeah, you're not ever going to be in a situation where um, I don't know any black person that just popped up somewhere. There's a lot of work it takes to get into these rooms, into these spaces, and I mean, you don't just get there by happenstance. And then oftentimes, if it was really just about, oh, we got there because there was some quota to fill. Why are there still so few of us? What are the quotas, right? If it really is about reaching a quota, maybe change the quotas. I don't know, because it's still so few of us. It's still so few of us, and I think a lot of us can speak to this in our various industries. There's still so few of us, not enough of us. So if it's really about, you know, oh, you're a DEI hire. Well, we need some more DEI hires.
Where's the rest
Where
of
are the
them?
rest of us?
Where's the
Since
rest
we're
of
all
them?
DEI hires. So yeah.
And to be honest, it's insane to me because I feel like it has taken us back some steps, but also it has overlooked the hard work. And again, if there's a quota, then where's the rest of the quota? I was talking about this the other day on one of my lives. It's like it is lonely at the top. If you've been a black leader, which you have, the higher you climb on the ladder, the less likely you are to see people who look like you and who are going to be in a room having conversations like you. And like you said, we want diversity. Diversity leads to more, like the bottom line, more revenue, right? Like you need everybody at the table to make decisions that are going to influence everybody. But a lot of companies have shied away from it, or I think there's this thing about change. Like people don't want to be uncomfortable, right? Like white people specifically, I'm calling out white people, don't want to be uncomfortable. So what happens is that when it becomes too many of us at the table starts to shake a little bit. It starts to rumble, and I think there's this like immediate pulling back or scaling back of having us at the table as a result of that.
Yep.
Something that I also want to talk about. So I work in the field of education, and something that they've talked a lot about is that they want to get rid of woke education in the education system. So basically, any sort of uh, diverse learning or learning about different cultural backgrounds and also cultural awareness. And so we grew up in two very different places. So you're from North Carolina. I'm born and raised in New York. But I would love to hear from you, and I'll share a little bit, but I'd love to hear from you about your thoughts on how that you think that'll impact kids from those areas, from us being from two very different areas, like changing the landscape of education and kids not seeing people who look like them in textbooks and in curriculum. I can say that when we were growing up, this Christopher Columbus idea was a thing, right? They continue to tell us that he discovered America. And I remember as a kid in school only seeing our people in shackles. Like we heard about slavery as Black History, every Black History Month. They didn't teach us about how we were kings and queens and all of the amazing things that we did. And so I'm imagining how this could be 10 times worse if they get rid of what they call woke education, which is really just education. Like you're teaching kids the truth about their history versus lying to them. But in my experience, and I think New York City is pretty progressive. It's a pretty progressive city. And so if I felt that way in New York City, I imagine that kids in Texas and Florida are really going to struggle with those changes because that was the only opportunity that they had to see themselves in education. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't know our history, bound to repeat it, right? And that I think obviously there are good parts of our history, and there are plenty of terrible parts of our history. How do we repeat the good parts of that history, and how do we avoid the bad parts if we don't know the history at all? And so I think that is the big concern I have with people deciding we need to pick and choose what we teach the kids. I grew up in North Carolina I went to a small private Christian school, but predominantly Black. So it was obviously a lot of, Black history was, slavery and civil rights movement. And, we learned about, Black inventors and things that were invented by Black people that, people often don't talk about, even though, I mean, we'd be sitting in the dark if not for Black people.
Correct.
So there's just so many things as it relates to our history that are part of our everyday lives that are Black history, whether we realize it or not, whether people who aren't Black realize it or not. But I, whew, I think a lot of it is just rooted in we don't want to make a certain demographic of people
Mm.
feel badly about all of the harm, all of the oppression, all of the ills that were inflicted by their ancestors on other people's ancestors. And so it's really a way to rewrite history, and we just can't allow it to happen. I remember, I think most Black people who grew up learning about Black history, you learned about it in a very specific box.
Yeah.
It was until I got older and started, really digging deeper into our history where I started to learn more about all these other things that, Black people were involved in. We pioneered more than just, sports, and, there's more to our history than just the civil rights movement. There's a lot more to it. And I think you have this pushback now because as we've gotten older, as we've learned more specifically, like, millennials, and we're now, in these positions where we can affect change, there's a lot more conversation of let's talk about these parts of our history, let's talk about that part of our history. And so you have people who are very intentional in saying that's not what we want to do. So let's reel it back in and put y'all back over here. And this is what we're going to talk about. This is what we're not going to talk about. You have book ban, all these different things, and there's already a struggle with students now in terms of reading comprehension and all those sorts of things. So the more you ban books and we can't learn this, we can't learn that, you're actually not just impacting the history people are talking, you're impacting their overall scope of learning and what they're able to comprehend and do as adults. So how are they going to function in the real world if they're not even being taught certain things and been made aware of their history? So it's
And you hear a lot of the talk around kids not being on reading level and not being able to read, and it's like, if I'm giving you something to read that don't look, sound like, or feel like anything you've ever experienced, what child is going to read that?
right.
The reading levels are going to continue to plummet. And I think that there is some feeling of threat behind Black people advancing and Black kids advancing if they continue to teach kids their true history. And it's so crazy to me because people don't talk about it enough, but Black people, Black kids were more successful in schools when they were segregated. And I know that a lot of people don't want to hear that, but in spaces where Black kids had other Black people that looked like them and sounded like them and were teaching them, and they were able to interact with their peers about history that was true history about them, kids thrived more and were academically more successful. And I personally believe that there's something to them deciding to desegregate schools at that time when Black people were thriving, the same way that they decided to burn down Tulsa and all the other Black Wall Street, all the places where Black people were thriving. I think there's something to that.
Well, I will say too, there's something to be said about what it does for people when they look to their left and look to their right and see people look like them. It normalizes that the idea that you're not one of one, you're not some outlier. There are other people that look like you that can do all these different things. And so when you don't have that and you're put in settings where you're one of a few or you are one of a handful, that's where people can exploit your imposter syndrome or make you feel inadequate, or they can kind of take stabs at your confidence and make you feel like you shouldn't be somewhere where you absolutely should be. And so I definitely think that there's room and a necessity to have environments for people to see themselves, because when you get into the real world, unfortunately, we're not going to always see ourselves when we're in these spaces. So it's crucial that we maintain safe spaces for people.
Ooh, that was a word. That was a word. And it makes me think about in 2023 when they decided to disband affirmative action. And their excuse for it was that it's prioritizing certain groups of people, and mostly white men were saying that they felt like they weren't given opportunities because of affirmative action. Now, before we get into that, because that's insane, that's an insane allegation. But if you look at the history of affirmative action and who it actually helped, white women benefited the most from affirmative action. White women were able to get into spaces white women were able to elevate in their careers because of affirmative action, it did not actually support black and brown people as much as they would have liked to make it seem. And so I'm just wondering, like, what do you think is the ultimate goal here, right? Getting rid of affirmative action, banning DEI funding and programs in schools. What do you think the ultimate goal is of the incoming administration?
I mean, the targets are always black and brown people for any. If it were really about creating an even playing field, would you disband affirmative action, or would you also disband legacy
Ooh,
admission? Like, would you go after both of those if it's about really making it a fair playing ground and an even playing field? But that's actually not the goal, right? We know the goal is to reset what our history has been, and by our history, I don't mean our history, black people, I mean America's history, is to set it up where certain people maintain their power. And this is really about, too, if you look at the changing demographics in this country, there's more immigrants. The country is getting more diverse. And so when you look at census data and they're projecting, what the makeup of of the country will be in the next 20, 25 years, the ruling class is their numbers are dwindling. They're getting smaller and smaller. And so it's about figuring out, okay, well, we can't really change that, but we can find ways to make sure we still stay at the top.
right.
So that's really what it's about.
And it's so insane because I think about this in many ways. I think about this as in regards to black people and what we experience, but I also think about how do you, instead of trying to make the top smaller, how do you widen the top to make more room for people? How do you widen the top to have diverse people sitting at the top of the table, right? Like, there more groups can sit at the table to create diverse decision making, but when you try to narrow the scope of the top, like you're trying to essentially make it harder for people to access the top, certain people to access the top, and what that means. And it is about, I think, the shrinking of a certain the major what was the majority in America, and them feeling like some of what they believe to be true is going to be erased because other people will be in spaces to tell true history. And I think that's a threat to their livelihood and their leadership. And I think that, not even I think, I know that that is the cause of them wanting to disband and dismantle initiatives that they think specifically aid or support or help black and brown people.
It's not actually a threat either, though, because they largely still wield power. So it's not a threat to say let other people who are qualified in. It's not a threat to share space. I don't think anyone that has felt maligned or oppressed wants to then get into a position and then turn around and do it to other people. I think people just want their fair shot. Nobody wants to say, all right, I'm in the room, now you can't be in the room. It's really about just saying, hey, make room for everybody. It's not about saying when we get here, we're gonna boot you out and we're trying to take it over. Y'all rule long enough. It's our turn. Nobody's saying that it is our time to be a part of this. It is our time to have a seat at the table. It is our time to have our chance of leadership. It absolutely is long overdue time for that. But it's not about displacing or replacing them the way they think.
And that's a word. And I think as long as they have that mentality, and it's a threat to the fact that black people, when we come to the table, like I said earlier, we're expected to be overqualified. And so when you have people that had to work twice as hard to get to where they're at, sitting at the table, you're likely to start feeling like you're going to lose your spot because maybe you didn't work as hard. Maybe you did get into an Ivy League school because you are a legacy. Maybe you are sitting at the corporate table because it's a part of your family lineage and your family has owned certain spaces. And so I do think that the more qualified we are, the scarier we are to them. And this is interesting because it's going to lead me into one of the questions that was submitted by one of our guests. Is they wanted to know, should black people be comfortable with being the only black person in the room?
I don't trust black people who are comfortable being the only black person. I think we have a responsibility to lift as we climb. We already know how hard it is for any of us to get in the room. It's our responsibility to leave the door open for the next person, to lend a hand, to say, all right, now that I got here, how can I pay it forward? if someone else who looks like me wants to, reach out and have a chat about, hey, I've been watching your career. I see what you've been up to, or, I don't really see people that look like us in this position. Can you give me some advice? We have a responsibility um, to see to it that people that look like us also get a chance. And, because so few of us get into these rooms, it's about ensuring that we share some insights that folks may not, have. From North Carolina, I don't know anybody, I don't know anybody that was in music. That is not, I'm not from a place that's a hub. I mean, North Carolina's become more of a hub over the years, but I didn't grow up around people that knew anything really about the music industry. So that was something I had to kind of traverse on my own. Um, Now that I'm in the position, if someone wants to know how I did it or, has specific questions, I always make sure I take the time to, set up a Zoom or, a coffee or what have you, because I don't want to be the only one there. And it's not even just about being the only one in the room presently. Are you leaving the door open for people to come behind you? Because um, it's cool to have representation right now, but if no one is helping to mentor and help train up the next group, then we're going to be right back where we started at. And so that's not what you want. So we have to make sure that we pay it forward. So as far as like being the only one, I don't subscribe to the idea that I have to be the only one, that any of us should be the only one. And nobody should ever be comfortable being the token.
Amen. So, and it's to me so interesting because I often talk about this idea that Black people need to not subscribe to this idea of crabs in a barrel, where it's like one person is going up, you trying to grab each other like crabs in a barrel, trying to grab each other down to get to the top, and what a detriment it is, and what a danger it is to us as a whole, and how it causes a threat for us to have a seat at the table in general. Because eventually, as that token Black person, they're gonna get tired of you. They are. And the minute you try to push back or you try to stand up for something, they're going to see you as a threat and they're going to push you down. And then you were the only Black person in the space. And so being the only Black person, and also honestly, I think, hell no, you should never be comfortable being the only Black person in the room. That's insane. It is just, it's dangerous mentally, it's dangerous emotionally, it's dangerous physically. But I think to add to that, sometimes we are the only Black people in the room. And what I think we should do in those spaces is be proud to be the Black person in the room. Not be proud to be the only Black person in the room, but stand up there tall and proud. And also, without threatening your livelihood, be sure that you are a voice that is taking Black people into consideration, into account. Because being the only Black person in the room and being silent or complicit,
it's also very burdensome to be the only one, because there's this saying that we have that we're not a monolith. We always say that, but no one knows that there's only one of us in the room. Can't one person can't speak. I don't feel comfortable speaking on behalf of the whole Black community. I think a lot of times we get forced to speak on behalf of everybody because we're so few in number. But there needs to be more of us for that reason. There needs to be diverse thought coming from people that look like us, because we don't all believe the same things. We don't all think the same way. We don't all worship the same way. We don't all live the same life. So, yeah.
Come on, worship the same way. Praise God. Won't you do it? And I remember at one of my places of employment way back when, every time something, it was a diverse organization. I worked at many diverse organizations, but every time something happened that involved Black people, I remember them asking me to speak to Black people or create spaces for Black people, or make Black people feel better. And I remember one day saying, I'm not the Negro whisperer. I can't. I don't. I speak Black. I speak the language. We got a language. We got a culture.
Yeah.
But I'm not the person that can fix all things for Black people. And when you put us in a space like that, there is this idea that we are a monolith, and that Black person who has now been tokenized can fix all things Black.
Right.
And that's a dangerous narrative. There's a danger in the single narrative, and we have to fight against that. But also, if you are the only Black person in the room, you need to bring that up.
You absolutely bring it up too, because the other thing I remember, this is what happened a lot during COVID and the whole George Floyd thing happened in DEI, and they started to create these initiatives. what I think happened in a lot of workplaces, and people remember, is like when it came time to form these committees and all these things, it was all right. Where are all the black employees? Can you join and take extra time? It's like, well, number one, that's a second job that is not in my job description. Number two, what you're asking of me, you're only asking of me because I'm black. It's not taking into consideration that this is an entire area of expertise. There are professionals who specialize in this. So if you're really serious about it, instead of putting that extra workload and burden on your employees that are already have other things to do, really make the investment and find the thought leaders in that area and in that sector to come in and say, we're really serious about diversity, equity, inclusion. I don't even like the term anymore because
They ruined
they
it.
really ruined it and made it something that's not. But if you're really about making sure that this is an equitable place for everybody and that everybody has equal, fair opportunity, you need to get the right people to understand what that looks like.
And we got to jump into the next segment, which is about you. I'm really excited. But when I think about the death of George Floyd, when it first happened and COVID coming into play, I remember people asking black people to make space for other black people to talk about George Floyd. And I think what was amiss was that people didn't realize that we as black people across the nation were grieving. We watched this man be killed and murdered in front of us. And you want us to now be grieving and make space for people while grieving and still having to show up at work every day knowing that black people are being hunted by the police, by the Klan, just in general, and still having to show up. And I remember thinking to myself, this is insane. And as a leader at the time, and I'm sure you can relate, I remember thinking, this feels hard to even show up. There were moments where I didn't want to show up for my team because I was just so devastated. And being asked to make space was one of the biggest challenges during that time.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I don't need how to words.
I'm not, and I'm not. I don't want to traumatize you before we talk about you. So I want to jump into the next segment of the show, which is the Bleadership segment, right? Black leadership, and we want to hear about your journey into Black leadership, your professional journey. And so first, I want you to tell us about what you're currently doing for work. So tell us what you are currently doing and how you do it.
Yes. So I currently work at a music media and technology company called Gamma, based out in Los Angeles. And we work with artists across a variety of spectrums, helping them distribute their music. If they want to work with brands, if they want to do if there's anything they want to do to help enhance what it is they bring to work from a creative perspective, we seek to support that. Um, Prior to here, I was at Def Jam and working at a bunch of larger companies. So now I'm working at a smaller company, and just it's definitely a different learning experience, different cadence. But it's exciting to do something different and be in a space where um, you can still challenge yourself. I think a lot of times when you get to a position of leadership, there can be this idea of like, all right, I made it. There's nothing more for me to know, and like I consider myself a lifetime student, a lifelong learner, and I think that there's always more for me to learn. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm taking everything I already know and have already done in my career and applying it to this role, but also keeping my mind open in that there's a lot more for me to learn. This is a different company. Um, it's not like some of the larger organizations I've come from, and that in and of itself is a smaller company. And so that allows us some flexibility to really do things differently and really reimagine how we approach our work. And so that's what's really
I love that. I love that. Sometimes we need to get back to the community and be able to reach more people that the larger companies probably aren't seeing, right? Because there's talent everywhere. And to be able to help people discover and make dreams come true is a really exciting thing. And so I'm excited to hear more about that. As you enter in that career, I'm sad that you are moving out of New York City. I'll be the last standing line brother in New York, but I say that with love because I love y'all. But I'll be carrying the torch in New York. But I'm really proud of you and excited to hear more about that.
Thank you.
And next, you talked about, we talked about you working at Atlantic and Epic Records. And so I would like for you to tell us about, take us through your leadership, your Black leadership, Black professional journey. How did you become successful? How did you get to where you are as a Black professional?
Do we want the abridged version or the, the long version? I'll meet in the middle somewhere.
All right.
I always wanted to work in music. I grew up, uh, singing, playing piano, and church and all that type of
Oh,
stuff.
my long brother can sing, y'all. He ain't gonna do it for
I'm
y'all.
definitely not about
He's
to
not gonna do it, but he sang. He sang.
I'm
Sang.
definitely not gonna
Okay,
do
go
it.
ahead
But
though.
that was like my dad, saxophone,
R.I.P.
and like I grew up, really surrounded by music, mainly jazz and gospel. But I always knew whatever I did professionally had to be. And so when I got to college, I was like, all right, cool, involve myself in whatever things that can help prepare me for a career. So getting involved in a college radio station, interning, volunteering for different entertainment events, different things like that. Whatever I could do to like just give myself some exposure. When I moved to New York after I graduated, I made some connections in college, one of which led me to an assistant. Um, and I went in for the interview, ended up getting the role there, and that was my start learning as an assistant. I think with the music industry, I always say this is my personal opinion. It's been my experience. And when you've been an assistant, specifically at a large company like that, it's the best way to learn. Because if you're really paying attention and if you're really taking it seriously, you can learn every aspect of the business. There's so many different departments, and you learn. All right, cool. I'm an assistant in this department. How does my department play a much larger role into everything else everyone else does? What is this person's role? What's that person's role? You're working with so many different people in so many different areas, internally and externally. So it really gives you the opportunity to learn the business. I call my experience at Atlantic boot camp, and I mean that in the most flattering way because I feel like it really helped set me up and prepare me for every company I worked at afterwards. I felt like I had a thorough understanding of the industry, a thorough understanding of the business um, that allowed me to thrive when I got other places. And so when I was at Atlantic, I was there for basically 5 years. I was an assistant in the brand department. Then I moved into the streaming and sales department at the time when like streaming was really starting to take off and really be the primary form of consumption among listeners. And so after I got promoted and stayed in that role, I think 2 years, I ended up leaving there to go to Epic Records. In a similar role, just continuing to move forward and figure out, okay, how do I continue to grow and advance? And so left to go to Epic, which was amazing. Um, and structurally, you learn they're different. They do things a little bit differently, than Atlantic. So even sometimes you start one place and you think, oh, this is how it's done everywhere. But no, every organization has to do things the way that works for that company, and they do things differently. So it really gives you a really holistic perspective about how each company approaches the same work, even though it's the same industry, it's just different approaches. There's no one size fits all. Um, and so 3 years at Epic, I worked there mostly through the pandemic, and then coming out of COVID, I ended up getting an opportunity to leave there and join Def Jam. And at this point, running a department and leading a department, which was a new challenge for me, because while I understood the work itself, being in commerce and working with streaming platforms and how to set up vinyl and CD releases and all these things across the sales landscape, it was different to be in a position of leadership where you are overseeing people. You're responsible for other people's growth, other people's learning. There's all of these as you being a leader. Overseeing T&E budgets and all these different things that come with being in a position of leadership and helping the company make larger, more informed decisions, even outside just the day to day of your role. So it was one of the most fulfilling experiences. Every experience I've had has been fulfilling because it's taught me something different. Um, and in leaving, Def Jam over the summer, that was one of those experiences where I left and I truly felt like, okay, I've seen a lot of different things, and I now can take everything I've learned and apply it to my current role where I am now. So it's been great. I've been very fortunate. We talk about Black leadership and Black leadership journey. I've been very fortunate. The companies I worked at thus far, um, two of which have been run by women. The other two run by Black CEOs. And one of the women is also a Black woman. So I've been very fortunate in terms of the leadership I've come up under, people who are really understanding and receptive to different viewpoints, people who, because they understand that, they go to great lengths to build teams and companies that reflect the broader world, right? So I've never worked anywhere where I felt like I'm one of the only ones here, or I have an opinion. Somebody else over here can't back me up. But I've always been, and I know that that's not everybody's circumstance. Mm-hmm. So I do say that humbly, in that I've been fortunate to not be the only one. I may be one of the few sometimes. I have been one of the few sometimes, but I've never felt alone or like I wasn't seen or someone else didn't understand my perspective. And I do understand that's a privilege, but that's been my journey so far, and it's allowed me to see that it's possible to be in these types of positions.
Yeah, and privilege, it's interesting because sometimes it's so hard for us to find ways to use the word privilege as Black people. But as someone who I've only had one CEO who was a Black woman, and she was a power. She is a powerhouse. She's still the CEO there. I remember when she stepped in as CEO, and there were so many people looking at her to make this like this drastic change or to fix everything. And it's interesting because it goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is like Black people have to show up twice. Like we got to show up twice as good. Mm-hmm. I remember people giving her such a hard time, and she was talented, smart, educated, all the things, and she still was met with a lot of resistance. And shout out to her because she's still doing her thing and running the organization, the first Black CEO there, first Black woman CEO there. And it was incredible to watch, and definitely an experience to work under the leadership of a Black woman, and I really appreciated that. You talked a lot about how good of an experience you had as an assistant at Atlantic, and how that helped you a great deal. Tell us about some of the obstacles you faced in your career, right? Because as a Black person, we don't just fall into leadership. There's hurdles that we have to climb to get there. And so, like, tell us about some of the challenges you faced, and also as Black people, sometimes we face imposter syndrome. I was texting you about this yesterday. Yeah. It took me forever to launch this podcast because imposter syndrome was whooping my behind. I felt like I couldn't. I felt like I wasn't good enough, or I couldn't do what I needed to do to get this off the ground. And thankfully, I have a line brother who gave me some kind words and told me to get it together and just do it. Shout out to my therapist and my kid who's recording for us. But tell us about some of the obstacles or the hurdles you faced, and maybe some imposter syndrome that you experienced on the way to your leadership.
I mean, yeah, there's always going to be that. I think for me, one of the biggest hurdles, just for myself, has been taking on an area of our industry at a time where it's changing, and you're kind of helping your colleagues learn and vice versa at the same time, because this is all new territory. And so this role I stepped into at Atlantic, once I got promoted from assistant, I think I was 26 at the
time. Spring chicken.
Right.
So you still a spring chicken. You still a spring chicken.
And you and I remember, now looking back on it, I felt like there was a lot of responsibility put on me at the time when I got promoted, given the gravity of my role, because it was so new. And none of us knew how much work it would be, or what the real responsibilities would be, or how much I would be put in a position to present to senior leadership. And even though I'm nowhere near at this time senior leadership at all, but I'm being put in positions that a lot of my peers in other departments weren't put in. And so, because I was up to the challenge, no matter how hard it was, and I rose to the occasion every time, it did allow me, with all the changes going on in the industry with streaming, it did allow my career to probably move a little bit faster.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a big hurdle, aside from already being, Black, and you know, you're in these rooms and you're speaking to things that historically maybe you're not the person speaking to. So now tack on the fact that I'm also younger.
Mm.
And so that was something that I didn't expect, because now you get the sense when you get into some of these rooms, and it's not even at Atlantic, this is just as I've gone through my career, you kind of get the sense that people aren't, they might be questioning you or doubting you because you're Black, but then they also might be questioning you or doubting you because you're young. How did you even get, into this position?
How'd you get in the room?
How did you get in the room to begin
You
with?
must have snuck in here.
You must have snuck in here and nobody vetted you.
Mm-hmm.
So that was definitely a hurdle. I've gotten over it now. I know I've earned my place.
Come on, Ern.
I
Come on, Ern.
I own that, and I walk in it daily. But that was definitely a hurdle. Trying to, and while you working on your own confidence, because this is a new role and this is new territory. It's almost like you've been put in a position to not only be confident for yourself, but also make other people see that, and then have them be confident in you. It's almost like, all right, I can see you don't really trust me. How do I make you trust me? It's like, it's a very tough position to be in, but the way you do it is by doing the work. I think. And I know that sounds very simple, but don't try to take the shortcuts. Like, really, you don't, the things you know, and you don't know the things that you don't know. So always ask questions. I think that's another thing too that I struggled with in the beginning, not for very long, thankfully. Is, I think a lot of people do this thing where something comes up and they're afraid to ask the question. They don't want people to think that they don't know. But at some point, people realize you don't know.
Let me tell you something, because you can only hide it for so long.
You can only hide it for so long. So better off to just rip the band-aid off now, tell people you don't understand it, and then you can move forward and learn something new. It's not a lack of knowledge is not a weakness. It's only a weakness if you allow it to be a weakness. So, and it'll continue to be one if you're not honest with yourself and those around you. Say, hey, listen, I don't actually understand this. Can you explain it to me? I've sometimes been like, yo, explain it to me like I'm 5. Like, really break it down.
Talk to me like I'm
Talk to me like you're still rolling this out, and you gotta explain to everybody. That's okay, right? That's been pretty much my experience and like hurdles I've faced. I feel like imposter syndrome is an ongoing thing. There's some days you feel like you got it, and then other days you're like, it's a rough day, and you just gotta keep going.
Yeah, and surround yourself with people who are going to support you through and tell you can do it, because imposter syndrome can whoop your ass when you're doing it by yourself in a vacuum, in a silo. And even just the texting, being able to say to you yesterday, like, damn, imposter syndrome is kind of like playing its role. And me launching this podcast was really meaningful, because to get words of encouragement and to feel like you can still do it. So surround yourself with people who encourage you.
Yep.
And so before we're getting close to time, but we do, in the vein of giving advice to folks, we've had people reach out and submit some questions or some information that they'd like advice on. These are Black people in the professional world. And so I'm gonna read out somebody's ask for advice, and then the two of us will give some advice on what we think that they can do to support them. So they said, I'll get straight to the point because I don't want to waste your time. It's never a waste of time. Take your time. We're excited. How do you handle workplace harassment from a supervisor who has previously been your mentor? I'm currently an office assistant at my job, and my then mentor advised me to go back to school and get my degree and level up within the corporation because she loved my work ethic. After I finished my last semester, out of nowhere, she started treating me differently and started blackballing me to other supervisors from different departments within our company. Most of these supervisors know me, So I've been made aware, but some don't. And I'm concerned that it can hurt my career. For context, she's an older black woman, and I'm about her daughter's age. I've heard about what younger women go through with their supervisors, but we were close, so I never thought this was coming. What should she do?
Oof. Well, I think one thing that's good that she mentioned is that there are other supervisors in the organization that also know her, which is why she got this information. So I do think that she's in a much better spot than she may realize she's in, right? Because you have other people clearly at your former mentor's level who know that whatever these things being said about you are not right. And so it sounds like she has some allies in that organization. My advice would be continue to lean on those allies, not worry about the people that are trying to pull you back, pull you down. Focus on the people who are trying to empower you. Because clearly, the fact that there are other people in leadership that have tipped you off, that means that this other person that is trying to malign you and railroad you, they're only going to get but so far. So I think the harder part is the realization of, oh, this person was my mentor and this is somebody I thought I could look up to and I really trusted and I thought I could go to this person. I think the hardest part, if you really sit back and think about it, is really just the realization of, dang, that's not the relationship I thought it was. But I don't. It doesn't sound like she's in as tough a spot as she thinks because she does still have support from leadership, and I think focus on that. Still be professional with this woman. You still have to work with her. Um, maybe have if you feel so inclined and you really do want to understand and just you know air everything out respectfully and professionally, maybe you do ask, can I grab coffee with you? We'd love to just, discuss and, just have a conversation about how you think, um, this may be impacting the way you show up in the workplace. If you feel inclined, you don't have to do that. But it sounds like again, you have leaders in that organization that already see your value, see what you bring to the table, see, how much you contribute already. Focus there and don't focus on
The hater.
the haters.
Listen, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. And I've learned that throughout my career. And sometimes people like you when you're in a position of serving them versus a position of leveling up or getting close to where they are. So sometimes they will try to keep you at arm's length once you start to level up. Sometimes they recognize after they recommend that you level up that your leveling up might overshadow their greatness. And it's disheartening. And then the other thing is, you talked about this earlier, which is being a younger leader in the room or a younger professional in the room. As I've had similar experiences where I think because she sees you when you're around her daughter's age, sometimes people see you as such and don't think that you're ready for that next level because they're using your age, they're weaponizing your age against you, and also see you as a threat. Because why are you climbing so fast? And I think our generation has changed the trajectory of professionalism, specifically
1,000%.
Black professionalism. Whereas our parents and our grandparents, they sat in jobs until they retired. They was there for 30 something years, 60 something years, giving their best. And I think this newer generation and the generations to come have said, we're not doing that.
But not only that, it's not only are we not doing it. I mean, I'm 34 now. I think as long as I think as we get older, we realize I wish I could just sit in a job a little bit longer. Like I don't think anybody I don't think anybody wants to job hop, right? But we're not, unfortunately, our generation not in a position where people just sit in jobs any longer and can expect to grow and expect to move forward and all that. So yeah, this generation, our generation might be moving faster because the way things are set up in the job market. We've been put in a position where we have to, move around more. And personally, you know, I moved around out of necessity when I've moved, not because I've necessarily wanted to. And so then, to your point, you then have leaders that think, "Oh, wait a minute, they're moving too fast." I mean, I think you ask the average person does not want to always look up and have to move around. You do it because you have to. Um, and on the other part of leadership, I think too is unfortunately, I was having this conversation with a friend the other day too. You really do have some leaders that not only feel threatened, but a lot of times this acting out from leaders is a reflection of insecurity on their own part. Because I've never felt, this is me personally, I've seen it play out, and I always tell myself I'll never be that person. You being good at something doesn't mean I'm not good at my job. So I don't need to act out in these ways that really show people that I'm insecure. We all have different strengths, and we all each bring something unique to the table. So I don't need to knock you out the way or elbow you in the face to get where I am, or to confirm my space and confirm my position. And unfortunately, you do have a lot of people who hold leadership roles that feel like they have to go out of their way to do that. I just ask people to be mindful when they get the opportunity to be in leadership, and they ask yourself, if you start to feel that way, ask yourself why you feel that way. Come on. Ask yourself that, so that way you don't become what you despise. You don't emulate something that you felt was so damaging for your own growth. Make sure that when you get in a position that you are picking up some of those.
Yes, and to the person who sent the question, because I lost sight of the question, you answered it, I didn't. To my line brother's point, align yourself with other great people, continue to do great work, maybe try to speak to them, black person to black person, black woman to black woman, share what you're going through and what you're experiencing, and maybe try to get to the bottom of what's changed, but also document everything. Document everything, document your work, take credit for your work, because if not, that is how they get you. So be mindful of that, but yes, continue
BCC yourself on email.
BCC yourself. Get that email paper trail. All right, with that, we're a little over time. I feel like I could do this forever with you, because this feels natural. We're just talking. But real quick, tell the people where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Mike Hamilton Jr. That's my only real social media.
He not on the TikTok.
I'm not on TikTok. I'm not on X now. I'm not really on there. And LinkedIn is Mike Hamilton.
Nice. Okay. Thank you for coming. I love that you're here. I'm so excited that you're the first guest. And hopefully you'll come back and chop it up. I would love to get groups of black professionals to come down and just talk, and for us to connect and talk more about what we experience as black people in the professional world. I want to thank you all for tuning in and for listening to the first ever episode of the Bleadership podcast. Many more to come. Again, if you're watching this from YouTube, make sure you click that subscribe button for more content like this. If you're watching from Spotify, make sure you comment. Let us know what you think. Tell us if there's anything you would like for us to change. Make sure you follow all of the socials that are in the link tree in my bio. And we want you to be a part of this experience, right? I created this podcast not just for me and not just for the people who are on here, but we want to hear from black people and black people in professionalism, and also people about the black culture. So we want you to tap in, go to that link in my bio, fill out the form, and let us know what you'd like for us to talk about and give advice on as black people. Until next time, I love y'all. Peace, love, and chicken grease and all of that. And we'll see you next time. Thank you for tuning in to the Bleadership podcast with the real Dwight Thomas.
Let's go.
Take off the cloud chase, take off the Wi-Fi, take off the uniform, take off the car loan, take off the flex and the white loss, take off the weird ass jewelry. I'ma take 3 steps, but I'm taking off top off. Take off the fabricate streams and the microwave memes. It's a real world outside. Take off your idols.